Thank you for having me here. The title of my presentation is The Future is Past. And then the second part is What Now? The first part is based on the nostalgia that I have about the visions of utopian that had been made even recently. But I think that that era has passed. And so the second part of my presentation is about the what now, which is a question that is about how we, planners, architects, designers, and academics can help to envision the futures of urban futures. So I would talk about first about the past of utopia, and then on its future. I will talk about some of the names, and I will mention some of the names that have been already presented this morning, or some names that have been already presented, but I also included some innovators, some planners and urbanists that, according to me, pushed the envelope a little further than others before them. I guess it's like this, yeah. So the history of utopia started even before utopia was coined as a term. As someone remembered this morning, Thomas More in 1516 coined the term utopia. That means no place. But there are a history of utopia where actually was before that the term was coined. So initially there were ideal cities, or the search for ideal communities and ideal societies. Then there was, of course, utopia that started, as I said, 502 years ago when Thomas More published his famous book. And then the search for urban ideals continued later on. And now the search is just for next urbanities, or just about what the next. Urban utopias, and I include in this innovations and utopias before the utopia, if you want, have been always marked by a search for a better life, which is this social dreaming, and usually is the better life than the authors of these utopias have lived in. And the social dreaming was a description on how the new society should have been organized, and the physical form that this ideal city should have. This is the ideal city part. The history of utopias can be narrated in many ways, and there's a wide literature about that. The short version, or the crash course that I have decided to tell, it can start with this image of the Garden of Eden. It was, in some way, an image that is not just related to the Bible, but other myth or historical myth included the places like the Golden Age or the earthly paradise, where everything was included, like abundance, lack of pain, and harmony was part of that. So, to go further, someone mentioned this morning Plato and Aristotle. Both of them were designed or defined a new society. Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Politics talk about ideal states. In Plato emerged one character that was pretty common in the future utopias. The author uses the description of the ideal state, the place or the society, to protest or to describe something that the society where he lived in was not providing. So he used that as a way to describe a potential future or a potential better organization of the state where he lived in. Let's do a big leap. 17 centuries later, artists, architects, military engineers elaborated a series of representations, designs, and also realized ideal cities, such as this one by Ambrogio Lorenzetti in Siena, who is called the effetti del buon governo, or the effects of good government that create, and the effect of the good government create the conditions for the city to flourish, and the economy of the city to flourish. Later on, you have Piero della Francesca. This is one of the three ideal cities paintings that were attributed to Piero della Francesca or to other authors at the same times. And you can see the idealization of the city, the organization, the buildings and the organizations of the buildings. Architects were looking for the good shape or the perfect shapes for ideal cities like Filarete. This is for Zinda, a city that then was transformed into reality in Palmanova, an existing city in close to Venice in Italy, or Sabbioneta, that is close to Mantova, and it was built in the 17th century. As I said before, utopias appear intentionally at some historical crossroads to provide alternative views to the problems the society was suffering at that time, and were those problems religious or secular. The most renowned of all, as has been mentioned before, is of course, the Thomas More utopia. And you can see here the picture of a representation of utopia that was part of the book that was published the first time in Latin, not in England, and it was published actually in English later on after that Thomas More actually was died, sentenced to death by Henry VIII. So utopia means no place or a place that is not yet real, but he described this society that was based on equality. The society described by Thomas More provided a much better life for its citizens than the one that was available for the citizen of England at that time. And he started from looking and observe the situation in his own city, London. This is London in basically the time when Thomas More wrote Utopia. It was a city very dense, of 120,000 inhabitants, and that became double that size at the end of the 17th century. So based on this, he started to describe the potential shape and the organization, the size, so providing some planning ideas for the city of Utopia, or the future city, or the ideal cities. So every city is divided in 4 equal parts. It shouldn't become too great. Place need to be appointed near running water for killing the beasts, and public hospitals. So health and the size was part of his topics. More or less at the same time, so a few years later, Tommaso Campanella, wrote the Città del Sole, or the City of Sun, and he wrote this when he was in prison for sedition, and he was considered an heretic by the church at that time. Similar to this, there was the City of Truth by Bartolomeo del Bene. And again, you can see actually the shape of these cities are pretty similar, and similar to the ideal cities that had been designed before. Bartolomeo del Bene described the city that were composed by different layers and walls, and at the center there was a temple where Aristotle himself was there and discussed about his previous ideas of the ideal state. Campanella was a kind of a critique about Aristotle because he didn't include the peasants and he didn't include the lower levels of society in his ideas. So the golden age of utopian realization started in the 17th century when an overpopulated, litigious, and hyper-divided Europe was facing religious intolerance, poverty, wars, and later on the effect of industrial revolution. On the other side of the ocean, the new world that actually was referred to by Thomas More before, and 800,000 inhabitants, a lot of land available for social experimentations, while in Europe, 74 million of people lived in a place that has more or less the same size. So utopia communities started to flourish from the east coast to the Midwest, and then finally to the West. Religious and secular groups like the Shakers, the Mormons, the Fourierists, the Perfectionists, the Inspirationalists, the Union Colonists created their community in what is now the United States. The first was, of course, New Haven in 1638. Other communities were founded in North America, like the Phalanx or the Icarian in Illinois, or Hygeia, the city of health. This particular Hygeia was actually thought to be built on the other side of the Ohio River in the Kentucky state, very few miles from where I live in Cincinnati. I just superimposed the idea on Ludlow, which is the current place. So this was very close to where I live. Other protagonists that I think we can include in this story are some innovators like Ildefonso Cerdà and the Ensanches in Barcelona, or Soria Imata, who actually thought about the linear cities, and only a small portion of that is still visible in Madrid, while the Cerdà and Sanchez are visible in Barcelona. Ebenezer Howard, it was remembered this morning by Tony, who actually proposed a marriage between town and country in order to create this harmony between through the garden cities concept. In 1914, other protagonists actually, as I said before, move and push the envelope a little further. This is Warren Manning. He's a landscape architect, and in 1914, he started to create a national plan. He designed, drawn by hand. There were no satellite images, there were no CAD, there was no GIS. It was just by hand. In 1914, he created more than 1,000 maps of the United States to create the basis for a national plan. And so one of the idea that he had was to change the borders of the state. And you can see here in this map that he proposed to modify the current borders of the states, the 48 states, the contiguous states in US, in order to be more close to natural borders. I don't know if you know what gerrymandering is in the United States. So this is a Warren Manning. Sorry. I tried to crack. Anyway. More recently, 60s and 70s, another landscape architect, Philip Lewis Jr., one of the father of ecological planning in 1960, started to work at the national level in order to create some 23 constellation cities and to save the black part, if you want, of this map and concentrate the transformation within the rings of this satellite. I need to go faster, I think. So other utopian thinkers like Le Corbusier that actually thought at the same level of Philip Lewis, but densification on a small scale. Frank Lloyd Wright, broader acre city, no housing, no traffic problem, no tall building, an acre of ground minimum for the individual. This was his broader acre city. Of course, some take too literally, actually, what he suggested, and so we have Levittown and all the suburbs that we have in U.S. as well as in other places. Paolo Soleri, he was probably the last of the utopian thinker. Here is in Cosanti, which is one of the two small cities that he started to create. And he designed cities for 800,000 inhabitants, so cities, buildings, megastructure, call whatever you want. But he combined this, and the thoughts that were in the back of these ideas were very, very deep, and they were reflecting his fears of the future and the environmental condition of the city. This is Arcosanti, which is a part of the city that he built in the Sonora Desert in Arizona, the same place where he arrived from Torino to meet Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin West, that he left because it was, he has, as you can imagine, a completely different point of view than Frank Lloyd Wright. One of his last ideas was actually to put archaeology, which was his philosophy, into space to create places for this. There were crossroads in the history of when utopia came out. The Renaissance in Italy, France after the Revolution, Europe and United States during the Industrial Revolution. Japan in the 50s and the 60s was at this crossroad. And so Metabolism was a group of famous architects and urbanists that actually provided ideas like this one from Kengo Tange or Arata Isozaki, and they provided ideas that were very extreme. Just this is a sort of colorful note. We had a utopian thinker also in Cincinnati. Please meet Orville Simpson. Orville Simpson spent his entire life to design victory cities. He drew for 40 years by himself without any architectural background, without any planning background, without any kind of background, actually. He barely finished the high school, but he was a kind of, an idiot savant or a genius, if you want, or both of them together. And he created these drawings about victory cities. So let me go now to the end of my presentation. I think that now we are in front of two questions that we are in some way as an academic obliged to ask to our students and to ourselves. The first is the what if. And the what if is a question about investigations and speculations or potential transformations of our society due to driverless car, or we can ask our students, what if our city, or we will live till 120 years, and maybe someone here will see the bicentennial Symposium here, if someone has 20 years now. But anyway, what if the city would be lived by people that will live till 120 years? Are the city organized in order to fulfill this? And then the second one is the what now, which is more subtle question, and is about the issues that we are facing, the challenges that we are facing, and some of them have been remembered this morning. So the access to food, the access to clean water, the urbanization, radical transformations of cities, climate change, of course, refugee camps. So I think that we have the right, and at the same time we are obliged to ask our students to put together studios with different students from different disciplines in order to try to answer and to solicit the students to answer this question. Not to answer, sorry, probably is not correct, to at least to face these questions. So I will leave with this last image from Ditropia, and thank you, and sorry if I was longer than I was supposed to be.